A sci-fi MMO where you can actually pilot a ship or a multitude of ships spanning different classes and sizes was actually a quite rare commodity in the virtual world space. Sure, you had some successful titles like EVE Online, which was less like a dogfight simulator and more like a sandbox spreadsheet simulator, and then you had the very iconic space component of Star Wars Galaxies, Jump to Lightspeed. But there aren't many examples of these kinds of titles, really. And nearly every case file in the sci-fi universe of virtual worlds mimics many of the same clues and bits of evidence, making it a graveyard for online RPGs. Black Prophecy was another entry in the world of sci-fi titles, and although it came from a lesser-known developer, it was a developer known for taking risks and creating fun gameplay. Developed by Reactor Media of Hanover, Germany, and published by Tentacle Studios, Black Prophecy launched March of 2011. And although it picked up a lot of steam, as sci-fi titles often do, within a year and some change, it was shuttered. What went wrong with Reactor's Black Prophecy, and why did it find itself on the Death of a Game series, a series where we take a look at dead or dying games and pick out the largest contributing factors, utilizing a timeline of clues and evidence. Find out more by paying attention to the clues as they unfold along the way, culminating in everyone's favorite detective, final deduction. But for now, where does the story of Black Prophecy start? Shout out to the Mexican consulate in Houston for making my visa process in Mexico effortless. This video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends, where you can choose from over 800 completely unique champions and have billions of ways to customize them. You could choose from Tormund the Cold of the Dwarven faction, known for being a crowd control or wave-based champion. Then you have Jorgid the Breaker of the Knights Revenant, who is a classic hard-hitting character in the game. The final example I have is Nishak Verminlord of the Skinwalkers, another really strong attack champion, this time from the Skinwalkers faction. You can use one of these champions to access the new Cursed City content, which is a new region in Teleria offering 101 floors per difficulty of non-linear content. But wait, something's actually happening big this month too. The worlds of Raid Shadow Legends and Monster Hunter are colliding in an amazing limited time crossover, starting from now until March 5th. Players can collect 5 Monster Hunter themed legendary champions based on iconic monsters from Capcom's action RPG franchise: Rathalos, Xenagri, Alatrion, Fatalis, and Ruiner Nergigante. You can even get Rathalos the Blade Master legendary champion for free, simply by logging into Raid for 7 days between now and March 5th. If you haven't started playing yet, then what are you waiting for? Click the link in my description or scan the QR code on screen to get some insane bonuses available only via my link. You'll get 2 epic champions like Lightsworn, a very strong character from the Sacred Order, or Juliana, also from the Sacred Order but this time more focused on attack. Additionally, once you're in-game, use promo code RAIDXmas for new and old players. Come find me under my player name, player134906852, or under the clan tag, the NerdSlayers, and we could be legends together. I'll see you on the battlefield. Let's get back to the video. Well, it started back in 2002, with the launch and cult success of the German developer Reactor Media, and their cyberpunk title Neocron. Neocron, despite not being a super well-known title, was innovative and one of the first MMOs to not be an RPG, instead choosing the more FPS-oriented style of gameplay. This made Reactor a pioneer MMO developer in the space. In fact, Neocron is still alive even today, with not just official servers, but even multiple private servers as well, which I think shows that there must have been some kind of quality or good experiences there, because bad games don't get private servers, detectives. After releasing an expansion and sequel to Neocron, Reactor would transition to a new project by 2006, which would lead to the Black Prophecy. Black Prophecy was another science fiction-inspired title. This time Reactor wanted to commit to being fully in space, a realm not many online RPGs had even attempted. Black Prophecy would be revealed to the world August 21st, 2007, being labeled an action MMO, allowing players to fight in a multitude of spaceships and participate in multiplayer battles, single-player missions, and more. Black Prophecy would have a gameplay reveal April 8th, 2008, and the gameplay was impressive, and impressive enough to catch a science fiction fan's eye like mine, even though I was still playing Star Wars Galaxies at the time. The gameplay looked impressive, and that was already a key part of the puzzle, hopefully being fulfilled. More details would need to be released concerning what the Black Prophecy actually consisted of, however. In a bit of a shocking turn of events, the publisher behind Black Prophecy and Neocron 2 for Reactor would fold in August of 2008. This would leave the funding and development of Black Prophecy in a bit of a limbo, further straining things. Like every promising hero's tale, there has to be a moment where the protagonist is challenged, and that came for Black Prophecy April 2010 when they teamed up with the publisher Gamigo, another German company. Not only does Gamigo have a very poor track record of how they handled monetization and MMO development in general, basically choosing to make as much money with the least amount of effort as possible, like always, I have experience with them behind the scenes. And trust me when I say that they are pretty darn incompetent in my case. Gamigo has literally been divorced multiple times from, to let people know that I'm just not trying to fearmonger here, and that this move for Black Prophecy was like electing Scar. It doesn't take a detective to figure that out either, but they needed funding, because their previous publisher had just gone under. So sometimes a deal with the devil, or to complete my analogy, a deal with Scar, is needed. More details would be revealed about Black Prophecy at E3 2010, and the biggest aspects being that the game would be free to play and feature modular ships that you could upgrade. Well, those were the mostly positive aspects. There were some pretty hefty negatives. For starters, Reactor was calling the game an action online game now, which felt like a massive backtracking or downgrade from the initial expectations, which could have been accidental or not. Another issue, unbeknownst to the Engadget writer who lauds it as a positive, was that the game was largely being explained as a lobby sort of online game, where you just sit around and kind of wait for your matchmaking to take place. That's because the majority of the game was instanced, and not in a seamless world. In fact, there was a hub world and zone and a few PvP zones around it, but everything else was just instance matchmaking, which pretty much felt like nothing any MMO on the market felt like, or really ever. At most, that's a multiplayer online RPG, a MORPG, which for most people is a different experience than a massive one, especially with the whole idea of space in a sci-fi virtual world too. The expectations are grander, and suddenly Black Prophecy had shrunk in scope and expectation. They would release another trailer at Gamescom August 2010, and there was still a chance if the gameplay was good enough that people would play the game regardless if it had ground components or more persistent online RPG aspects. The problem is, in a sense, when you're seen or function as an MMO, people have lower gameplay and graphics standards. Black Prophecy was gorgeous for the time, so the graphics weren't really an issue there. However, if the gameplay wasn't up to par, shedding the MMO tag might have actually hurt them in the public eye in that respect. Black Prophecy would launch March 21st, 2011, and it managed to get some major coverage from two different outlets I have quoted, Rock Paper Shotgun and IGN. Rock Paper Shotgun was inclined to return to their game in their impressions, stating that although the game was proving to be laggy due to these server issues, they enjoyed the gameplay and thought that there was enough there serviceable to work with. IGN would rate the game a 7.5 out of 10, which for an online RPG was actually pretty impressive. They would exclaim their enjoyment of the game in their review. Black Prophecy is currently one of the best looking free-to-play MMOGs out there and is a perfect game for picking up and playing when you've got a bit of time to kill and fancy a bit of, well, killing. Though it's free, the game would be vastly improved with some added variety, less reliance on grind, and a truly open universe. If you liked games like Freelancer, Star Wars X-Wing, and Wing Commander, I liked all of them, it's well worth a download. IGN also pointed out some negatives, however, such as only being able to play as a fighter, not a miner or trader, like in EVE Online. Also having a total lack of free roam, greatly harming the immersion and the massive feeling of the game. They also disliked the fairly repetitive missions and mission structure, including the lack of story within them and the game itself. Worse, because the game is free to play, the repetitive missions are almost motivating to make you spend money on getting the faster progression. Because the game is largely played through matchmaking, you are at the mercy of the matchmaking system to properly matchmake you, which it doesn't, allowing for great range and levels between those that are matchmade. I thought I would offer some of my perspective on Black Prophecy as well, being a lover of spacefaring virtual worlds of all sizes, and at the time a still active player of Star Wars Galaxies in the Jump to Lightspeed space expansion on the Starsider server, which was the unofficial space server. While Black Prophecy being free to play would give it a lot of leeway in my eyes, however, I was kind of sort of spoiled in a sense. The space combat in Star Wars Galaxies was incredible. Most players were playing with joysticks for reference. To accompany an incredibly rich, massive open world RPG experience, I might add, Black Prophecy by contrast felt like a very, very clunky, and I would go as far to say even like the smallest ships felt clunkier than like mid-tier Star Wars Galaxy ships. But it wasn't just the gameplay, it's also the whole rest of the Star Wars Galaxies game that existed, and Black Prophecy had nothing of the sort. These things weren't easy to fix, which means that if the gameplay wasn't good enough on its own right, the lack of all the other things that we just mentioned was going to hurt the player base of Black Prophecy. By February of the next year, in a surprising turn of events, Gamago would announce another Black Prophecy title, this time Nexus Conflict. This was strange because the other Black Prophecy title was still around, with this game serving as a sort of prequel of sorts. But realistically, Reactor was only going to focus on one of them, right? And it looked like already, so early after launching Black Prophecy, they were looking to shift to another version of the game. Nexus Conflict would feature what I would describe as frigate gameplay, versus the previous fighter gameplay. I chuckled when I read this and realized this because I realized that, well, that's a lot of realizations, that my previous complaints about the clunkiness are sort of alleviated in a band-aid fix sort of way. If you just increase the scale of the ships and the combat, then the clunkiness doesn't matter, right? The problem is, I don't really know what else this version of the game added, and it really did seem like this was their last-ditch effort to keep the game alive. The shuttering of both titles would be announced at basically the same time, in September of 2012. A year after Black Prophecy launched, and the same year that Nexus War launched. Reactor would point to financial realities, which for a free-to-play game didn't just mean that they weren't making enough money, it meant that Gamago wasn't pleased with the results as well. The fact that they even managed to launch in the first place was already impressive given its history though. Notice how they also don't call it an MMO anymore too? The servers would shut down September 26, 2012, and I can't help but feel like Gamago placing unrealistic expectations on a title was a large reason for it not even lasting a year. Just think about that. If you put everything like the press release says into this, and even had people sacrifice like more than just their time, would you really just give up after a year? A common misconception in MMO development, even with experienced publishers, is that entire points of the game, in an MMO context, is that they forget that the entire point of a game like this is long-term success and vitality. And success for things like that, and worlds, don't come instantaneously for the vast majority of virtual worlds, and having that expectation of them is a bit silly and out of place. Unless you have just this massive pre-existing audience, right? Like WoW did, or like ESO did, or like Final Fantasy did. EVE Online, on the other hand, started with as low as 30,000 subscribers or active players, and they took that time to then slowly build the game out and now have it successfully running still 20 years later. Trying to spring to the finish line as a sci-fi online RPG just seemed like a difficult proposition, unless you could just absolutely knock the socks off gameplay and graphics-wise, and sadly that didn't happen. And so, yet another sci-fi virtual world would bite the dust. Something I feel compelled to mention in any of my videos in this series is the curse of sci-fi. Now don't get me wrong, I love sci-fi, and sci-fi fantasy like Star Wars. The problem is that the curse is more of the idea regarding perception, a word we have been echoing an awful lot today. Sci-fi virtual worlds create hefty expectations as we compare them to our worlds and the idea of exploring the never-ending vastness of space and more. With Black Prophecy, like many other sci-fi online titles, you got a very minuscule version of that dream, which is the curse of the sci-fi genre in a nutshell. The music's playing detectives, which means we have gathered plenty of clues to determine what is the largest contributing factors to the death of Black Prophecy. Improper advertising and a poorly managed expectation, clunky controls and gameplay, lack of long-term or meaningful progression and content. Gamago was publishing. And with that, we have another sci-fi virtual world to add to the pile. This time an even rarer spacefaring online RPG in Black Prophecy. Reactor sadly would cease operations back in 2012 after their competitive shooter Toxic would fail, but the online gaming space used to be full of random, smaller, talented developers like them that just couldn't make it in the online space after a while. It's hard not to look at stories like this and feel like if had things just been taken a little bit slower, without a publisher such as Gamigo involved, perhaps over time, like EVE Online, Black Prophecy could have had something to salvage. But for me, the problem will always be when creating an online world, if you settle on making just a game, and a mediocre one at that, then you'll end up doing very little to impress everyone in the end. Thanks for watching.